that poll just popped up. So if you get a chance, go ahead and answer a couple questions for us while we're waiting for everyone to join. Welcome everyone. As you're joining, there's a poll question or a poll with a couple of questions up on the screen. Go ahead and take a few moments and answer the 4 short questions we have there while we're waiting for everyone to join. Also, please mute your phones if you could. We're just going to wait a moment longer here, about another minute before we get started. There's a poll running. You should see on your screen. Go ahead and answer that if you get a chance, and we'll show the results here momentarily of our poll, then we'll jump in. Also, if you're a Twitter fan, you may see that we have a hashtag up on the screen there, hashtag validation. We'll be doing some live tweeting during the webinar, so if you'd like to follow us via Twitter, make sure you look up hashtag validation. Jeremy Tesh is the person in charge of doing our polling today. I'm going to ask Jeremy to close the poll if you would. Jeremy, can you also send out a chat reminding everyone about the change to the phone number that happened right before we started, in case people are having a hard time getting into the conference call? So hopefully we'll see our poll results here any moment. All right, so there's our poll results. So got a couple people who responded to us about the different types of printers that they're running today and whether or not they're printing both on inkjet and toner with rips. A number of people answered whether or not they have customers that are using or demanding cross-media jobs. And we didn't get a lot of people answering our poll, so hopefully we'll get some more poll interaction later. It usually helps with some of the dialogue back and forth. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Mike DiCasola. For those of you who do not know who I am, I'm the CTO at Finite Colors Solutions. I've been involved in color control, color matching between devices and color management for more than 20 years. Some contact information up there for you. So if after the webinar, if you'd like to get a hold of me and have any further discussions, I'm open to that. So you can contact me via email or via phone. Also, we're going to do a little Q&A at the end of the webinar. So if you do have, at any time during the webinar, you should see there's a little Q&A panel that will be open to the right-hand side of your screen. Use that Q&A panel to actually enter your question in, and then we'll address all those questions at the end of the webinar. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Our agenda for the day is we're really going to just jump through three main areas. The first one is, what is the problem? What's the difficulty with matching inkjet and toner today? Why is this a difficult thing to do, and why does it matter? Why do we care? We'll go through 5 tips and tricks, some things to keep in mind as you're trying to align inkjet and toner devices to one another color-wise. And then we'll talk about how you can go and do this on your own. The webinar should take about half an hour, so we try and respect everyone's time here and get to the point quick and expediently if we can. So the first question is, why does it matter? Why do we want to match toner devices and inkjet devices, two very different color imaging technologies? Really the main reason is when we match color, we have more opportunity. And we've seen this with many, many customers that we've worked with over the years. We like to talk about this as horizontal market migration. A lot of big words there that basically mean if you have your toner devices, your smaller format printing, matching to your larger format printing, it gives you the opportunity to migrate customers across those different formats. So when you have a customer that walks in to your shop and perhaps they're looking for a brochure or they're looking for some business cards to be printed, if you can easily get them or point them to a large format product and know and be confident that the color is going to match when you take them into that new medium, that new opportunity, that new product, then that's an opportunity to grow your business. And so if you have these devices matching, the opportunity exists. It's right in front of you, and you can capture it. Often what we find is that customers approach it the opposite way. They have a customer that comes to them and wants to go across these mediums, and so of course you say, yes, I'd love to sell that job. You go ahead and you go to the next medium, you go from a small format job to a large format job, and the color doesn't match, and now you're wasting a lot of time and effort and materials in trying to make those match because you weren't really prepared to sell that concept prior to this. One of the reasons that a lot of people do not attempt to get inkjet and toner to match is they simply think it's not possible. And there are a lot of myths surrounding the toner devices. And some of the myths that we run into are that toner devices are not consistent. By the way, if you can mute your phone, I'd appreciate that. So toner devices are not consistent. And what we find is that that's completely not true. Toner devices are very consistent as long as you calibrate them. Calibration does work on toner devices. It's going to be one of the first tips that we talk about today. Another myth is that toner devices are not accurate. This is also a misconception. What we find is that toner devices typically by default are set up to print business documents, not necessarily professional graphics documents. So it's really a matter of having the right settings to configure your toner device to print what you want, not a matter of it not being able to print accurate color. And the other myth is that toners have a very small gamut. And one of the things that I like to say to customers when we hear this about toners having a small gamut is we like to ask, well, is Grackle too small of a gamut for you? So if you're not familiar with Grackle, Grackle is the standard color space of an offset printing press. And it's really lauded as kind of the goal of where you want to be when it comes to color printing. What I have up here is a two-dimensional gamut diagram up on the right, and one of those is a toner, business class toner device, and one of them is the Grackle standard, and the business class toner device is actually in blue. So most toner-based devices, not all, but most professional-level toner imaging devices today are capable of printing a Grackle gamut. And if you can print a Grackle gamut, you're printing what most professional printers are expecting for color. So the toner devices do not have too small of a gamut, depending on what you're trying to do with them. The real problem with toner, and problem is probably a bad word, but the real challenge with toner is that toner devices were really designed to do one thing and do it well. They were originally designed to do business color, business documents. Now that doesn't mean they can't do professional graphics as well, but they were designed to do business documents, and once they're set up in a particular way, they're not very flexible. What I mean by that is the gamut is not very movable on a toner device. So one of the challenges that we'll face, a toner device can do one thing well, where an inkjet device can do many things well because the gamut's very flexible when it comes to inkjet. With toner, we don't have as much flexibility. That gives us a challenge in matching those devices, but it doesn't prevent us from trying to match those devices. So these are some of those misconceptions that we want to try and overcome. So let's jump into the tips. The first tip is calibration, calibration, calibration. This is a mantra that I have used my entire career in color control and color management. Anyone who's involved in color on any level will tell you that calibration is the first thing that you have to do. But a strange thing happens when we walk into shops where they're using primarily just toner devices. Often we find that they believe, the people using the equipment believe that calibration is ineffective on a toner device. Often we'll hear a story, something along the lines of this. I was using the device, the color was wrong, I go to calibrate it, and it didn't fix the problem. So the primary reason this misconception occurs is because toners do have a lot of drift. Toner devices have a lot of drift in them. They will change dramatically in color over the course of a day, given the right conditions. But the reason why calibration may not work is often because of mechanical issues. A test that we will do with someone who is in this type of a situation is we will basically fill a page with a medium gray color, and we'll have them print that page. We should see that gray page be very consistent across it, top to bottom, left to right. If it's not consistent across the page, often that means there's a mechanical issue. And a mechanical issue cannot be fixed by calibration. And so this is where that misconception comes in of calibration is ineffective. It doesn't work on a toner device. On the flip side, when we walked into many of these customers who are having color issues with toner, we asked them to go ahead and calibrate, and lo and behold, the calibration resolves the issue, as long as there's not a mechanical problem. So the message here is that toner is very inconsistent. It drifts a lot during a given day, but calibration works, and it's very successful, and it needs to be done minimally on a daily basis. So you have to calibrate. Most toner devices will offer one of two types of calibration, either calibration with a photographic grayscale that it calibrates off the glass, or via an instrument. If you have an instrument, it's a much better calibration than the grayscale, so it's something I definitely recommend you do. On inkjet, we run into the opposite problem. Most people believe correctly that inkjet does not drift very much, and that's very true. A good aqueous inkjet device will not drift very much, even over possibly like a month, but it can drift. And if you get out of the habit of calibrating the inkjet device, then I guarantee you that it will drift when color becomes mission critical, and you will have a problem matching. So calibrate, 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 both on toner because it does work, and both on inkjet because you do need to calibrate. Inkjets aren't so bulletproof that you can't calibrate them. The second tip that we'd like to point out today is application settings. So often with toner devices, not so much with inkjet, but very much with toner devices, we'll see that people are printing through applications. So what this means is that I open up an application such as PowerPoint. I'm showing a PowerPoint presentation right now, and I will print that to my device. The settings that pop up in the application when you print do matter. So as an example on the screen, I have a screen grab from Photoshop. If I'm printing from Photoshop, I have this area called color management, and color handling right there comes up, and it says Photoshop manages colors. If I change that drop down, it might say printer manages colors. Choosing Photoshop to manage your colors versus your printer to manage colors will have a big impact on how the color comes off your device. And so it's important to know what application settings affect color, and then making sure that you align them between all your applications. One of the caveats to this, I guess, would be that although the application settings do matter, they matter less or more depending on what applications you're printing from and how you're printing to your printer. So if you're printing from Microsoft applications, the settings that you choose when you print have a much bigger impact typically than if you're printing from a professional graphics package such as Photoshop or the Adobe Creative Suite. If you're printing through print drivers, the print drivers directly to the printer, so you're using the manufacturer's print driver to print to the printer. More often than not, the settings that you set when you print have a much larger impact on the color that comes out. Where if you're printing through a RIP, a raster image processor, then the application settings matter much less because the RIP overrides most of those. So if you're running with a RIP, the application settings matter less, but the RIP settings matter more in that case. A couple other tips. There are applications out there. Adobe has a great application called Bridge. It does a lot of things, but one thing that it does pertaining to these application settings is it allows you to normalize all your color settings across all your applications. Another good idea is that when you determine what your application settings should be, either in your RIP or in your specific native apps such as Adobe Illustrator or Microsoft Word or what have you, grab some screen grabs, do some screen grabs of your settings, save those and document them, print them off, staple them together, put them in a safe place. One of the bad parts about settings is often if someone changes that setting, it's going to stay, it's going to be sticky. So if someone goes in, one of your employees goes in or what have you, or another coworker goes in and changes the color setting specifically to get some job to print correctly, and they leave that setting there, then the next person that goes up to use the RIP or the application may get color that is not what they expect. In that case, you go back to your documentation, you can say, oh, here's why the color isn't working, because this setting that was changed is now wrong, and now I know what to set it back to in order to get my consistency that I was looking for. I've mentioned drivers and RIPs a couple times now. I'd like to do a little quiz right now. I'm going to have Jeremy throw open another poll for me, and we're going to test your knowledge on the difference between what a driver is and what it does and how it impacts color compared to a RIP. So we're going to go ahead and throw that up right now. So we have 2 quick questions up there. Give everybody a few moments to go ahead and answer the questions for us. By the way, if you're not familiar with questions in WebEx, the circular, if there's circles for the answer, then only one answer is required. If there's little squares, you can do more than one answer at a time, so you can have multiple responses. All right, we're going to go ahead and close that. Let's see if we get any more participation compared to last time. So let's see what kind of results we get here on the poll. I love the spot color question. We're waiting for Jeremy to post our results. Any moment. This is where I need the Jeopardy music running. While we're waiting for the results to come up, going. So tip number 3 is it's based on this quiz that we just did, which is the difference between a RIP and a driver. And tip number 3 is to use a RIP over a driver. So there we go. There we have some results up on the screen. So we had a number of people that chose CMYK versus RGB for a driver. So typically, unless your driver is a PostScript driver, print driver, what we find is that most print drivers only allow you to print in RGB. A dead giveaway that this is the case is if you have Photoshop open and you try and print through your print driver and you let Photoshop manage color, Photoshop will only allow you to choose an RGB profile when printing through a driver that is only allowing RGB. This can be a big challenge when you're trying to match between inkjet and toner, because if you're forced to do a generic conversion to RGB on the fly, then pretty much all the color management is out of your hands. So this is one of the main reasons that you want to use a RIP, because a RIP will allow you to print in the native color space of the document, whether it's RGB or CMYK or spot color based and that type of thing. That's also kind of a dead giveaway to the second answer, or a dead giveaway of the answer to the second question, which is what happens to a spot color when you print through a driver? Often those spot colors are converted to what's known as an alternate color space, and then they're converted to RGB, and then they're sent to the printer. So if you have a customer that's printing spot colors, maybe that's their custom logo that they're printing for their business, and you send it through a print driver, it's going to be very, very difficult to ensure that the color in the logo prints correctly, either for toner or inkjet, if you're printing through a driver. So some of the limitations of a driver, RGB only in many cases, as I've mentioned. There's usually very limited controls when it comes to color management, so it's really hard to specify exactly how you want color to be managed, and there's really no spot color handling through a driver. Another benefit of using a RIP beyond the control and keeping color in its native color space is that a RIP allows you often to override the user settings at the application level. So if I have a user who's opening something up in Microsoft Word, if you're opening something up in PowerPoint, you're printing, whatever those settings are from Microsoft can basically be ignored, and the RIP will capture that document and override those settings and perform the color management according to how the RIP was originally configured. So it overrides those user calibration settings. It also allows you to do advanced calibration. So if you remember tip number 1, calibration, 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 both the grayscale calibration and instrument calibration on the toner side and the calibration on the inkjet side, most of those features are only available if a RIP is attached to the printer. If there's no RIP attached to the printer, very rarely do you have any ability to do any type of advanced calibration on those devices. So using a RIP is a big, big must-have to achieve matching between toner and inkjet. Tip number 4 is know what impacts color the most. So when configuring your print system, it's good to know what has the biggest impact on color. So, and here's a tip, it's not always a setting in a RIP or a setting in a printer. So with toner devices, the number one thing that really impacts color on the device, what I mean by that is I print a document once, I make a change and I print it again and I see a big shift in color. The number one thing that will impact that is the media setting on the printer itself, the media setting. So when you're using a toner-based device, let's say it's an imaging class toner device, you're loading some paper into the tray, and the device says, okay, well, what paper did you load? And you go in there and say, well, this was 80-pound cover stock. And when you do that, it sets up the printer to perform properly on that paper. If I go in and instead load the exact same paper and tell it it's 100-pound gloss cover or something like that, choose a different paper type, what you'll typically see, even though you've loaded the same paper, is that you'll see the color is dramatically different on that device. The reason is because the device has been tuned based on that paper type for the paper you're loading. But mostly what changes when you change that paper type is the temperature and the pressure that's used to transfer the toner to the paper, and that has the biggest impact on color on a toner-based device. So here's a take-home test that you can do if you want to try this and see what I'm talking about. Do exactly what I just said. Go grab some paper. Let's say it's an 80-pound text weight stock. Load it in. Choose the right paper type that's recommended by your manufacturer. Print a job. Now leave that exact same paper in the tray and tell it it's a different paper type. Tell it it's a 100-pound gloss or a heavyweight paper of some sort, and print it through the printer again. What you'll see is a dramatic color shift. What that means to us is that it's very, very important that you're using the right media type for the printer when you put the media type for the paper that you're loading into your printer. Very often we walk into a shop, they're having problems with color, and we see that they're not accurately changing the media type on the printer when they're changing paper. So it's very important. On inkjet, the thing that has the biggest impact on color is actually the media that you're printing on. So with toner, it doesn't matter what media you're printing on. It really is the setting that you tell it on the top of the printer. On inkjet, it's the actual physical media that you load. So another test that you can do on inkjet is load the paper that you're used to using, print through that paper with all the settings you normally print. Now load a different paper. Like start with a gloss paper and then go put a matte paper in, and then print that matte paper, print the job the exact same way, and you will find that the color dramatically changes based on the media that you've loaded into that printer. So it's really important on inkjet to choose the proper media for the job and for the requirements of the job that you're trying to accomplish. And we're going to see that this has a huge impact in trying to match inkjet to toner-based devices. The way that has the biggest impact, the way that has a big impact, that media on inkjet, is really something known as dynamic range. Dynamic range is a term that used to be used a lot in photography and in the early days of color reproduction prior to color management. You don't hear many people use the term dynamic range anymore. Dynamic range is really the distance between the whitest white and the blackest black on a given print condition. So on an inkjet, that would be the paper, the ink, the printer, the RIP settings, all that put together. What's the whitest white that I can get? Well, that's the color of the media, obviously. And what's the blackest black that I can image on that? That distance, that dynamic range, has a huge impact on the color gamut of the device, and it really has a huge impact on the visual appearance matching between two technologies, especially if those technologies are very different from one another. So if we go back to our myths about gamut, one of the myths was that toner has a small gamut. We can flip that myth around a little bit and say, well, inkjet has a larger gamut than toner. And that is true. It has a larger gamut potential than toner, but that does not mean that it always has a larger gamut than toner. And that is because media has a huge, huge impact on the gamut size of an inkjet device. And I'm going to talk about that here in a moment when we actually get to the process of doing this. By the way, if you're interested in understanding a little bit of my comments on how dynamic range has a big impact on color gamuts and on color imaging and the perception of color quality, I do have a white paper that was recently published. If you go to our website, finitecolor.com, and you go to our Color Source blog, there's a blog post and a white paper that you could download that is named Dynamic Range Still Matters. And it can take you through this in a lot more detail than we really have time to cover in our webinar here. So, tips and our tricks. The question is, how do we actually go and do this now? How do we actually make inkjet and toner align to one another so that I can more easily sell jobs across those two mediums? The first thing is, as I've said multiple times already, calibrate, calibrate, calibrate. You have to calibrate your devices. There's also an assumption here, and the assumption is that if you're calibrating your devices, you also have good color management profiles that describe your devices. So you have a profile that's been built for the paper and for the printer that you're using. Calibration is ensuring that properly prepared profile and color management are going to work as expected as they were developed when they were originally built. So the calibration makes sure that your color management system is tuned properly so that the profiles that have been built are going to work. The next thing that you need to do is evaluate the gamut of your devices on the media that you want to use to try and do this matching, and then choose the proper media so that you have similar dynamic ranges. Part of the problem that we run into with trying to match toner compared to inkjet is that in production printing of this type, as opposed to, let's say, trying to make an inkjet proof that perfectly matches some other type of print condition, when we're trying to create production prints, we use something called relative colorimetric as a rendering intent when we print to our systems. And often when we use relative colorimetric, what that does is it ignores the paper white. So it's not going to try and make our paper whites match one another perfectly. It's going to let those just go wherever they want. And when that happens, we end up with an issue where visually our colors are not going to match one another. So what we need to do is choose medias that are similar enough to one another in white point and in black point, and again, that's that dynamic range, in order to get the visual appearance of the two mediums, these two very different technologies, to look similar when they print. So what does that mean? That's a lot of words. So what we're talking about is trying to match the gamuts of the devices, especially in the black point, as much as possible in order to get cross-media matching. What this also means, by the way, is that if you have two media that are very different from one another, you are never going to get them to visually match between toner and inkjet. And this diagram here is an attempt to explain that. These images, by the way, are taken from a tool called ColorSync. It's from a company called named Chromix. It's a great tool for analyzing color gamuts and for specifically looking at this concept of dynamic range in the black point, in the darkest part of the print. So what I have up here are 3 different gamuts. The gamut in green is a large format inkjet printer printing on a glossy photographic media. The interesting part is that the yellow gamut is the exact same large format inkjet printer printing on a matte scrim vinyl media. So 2 very different medias that have a dramatic impact on the color gamut of the device. The blue line is a professional imaging class toner device. Okay, so we can see here that myth of toner having too small of a gamut or inkjets having a larger gamut than toner really depends on the media that's loaded in the inkjet device. If you look over on the right-hand side, this is a 3-dimensional diagram, and you can see we've made them transparent so that you can see the bottom part of these gamuts. And what I want to point out is the lower that shape gets, that's the blacker or the darker, the darkest color that the technology can achieve. And when I have the blackest black very different like we see here, what that basically means is that I have different dynamic ranges. And when I have these different dynamic ranges, it's going to be very, very difficult to get the copier and the toner device to look similar because the black point and therefore the gamut of the devices is going to be very different. So what I want to try and do is find an inkjet media that's going to have a dynamic range that's very similar to the dynamic range off the toner device. And if I can do that, it'll be much, much easier to get something that visually looks similar between the two technologies. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to align the color settings. So we're going to go into our application. We're going to go into any of our applications that we're printing from. We're going to go into our RIPs. We're going to make sure that as much as we can, we want to make the color settings be consistent across our applications and our RIPs when we're printing from toner and we're printing to inkjet. Another tip is that if our gamuts are at least as big as a color standard such as Grackle, is that we would set both technologies up to make sure that they simulate that Grackle standard. And if we do that, we're basically pointing them to the same color space and allowing them to print in a similar manner when it comes to color. These are some screen grabs from different RIPs. The one on the right is an inkjet RIP, and the one on the left is a toner-based RIP. And one of the things that I see right away when I look at this is that in the RGB settings, kind of in the center area of the left-hand graphic, I see that the source profile is set to sRGB, and the rendering intent is sent to relative colorimetric. If I look in inkjet, we see that the source profile for RGB is set to Adobe RGB with the rendering intent of perceptual. If I leave these settings like this, that guarantees that if I print an RGB document to these two technologies, they will absolutely not look the same. So this is an opportunity for us to normalize these settings and bring these two technologies much closer in line. So how do we do it? We calibrate. We basically evaluate our gamuts and choose medias that will allow us to have success in matching the technologies to one another. We align our color settings to one another, and then we go ahead and test the results and see if we've achieved what we expected. When it comes to expectations, it's important to remember that in the printing world, we have never been able to achieve an exact color match between anything that we've done, from the original photograph that was reproduced in print all the way down till now. We have never attempted to get an exact match of the original. It's always a visual simulation between them. So we don't expect the technologies to be a perfect match, but what we do expect is that they're much closer to one another. They are acceptable enough of a match that we can do our cross-selling. Some other expectations, or another way you can set expectations with your customers is to print swatch books and samples that show how color looks on the different technologies as a way to kind of set examples of what or set expectations of what they're going to see when you print jobs on the two technologies. A couple final caveats for you. Remember that, or it's important to understand that spot colors often rely on the full gamut of the printer. If I went back to that application, if I went back to that screenshot of the inkjet and the toner RIP, one of the things that you could see is that spot colors go outside of the calibration and the color management. So if you're printing spot colors, often they'll take advantage of the full capabilities of the device. This is great for matching spot colors, but not so great if you're trying to get two devices to match each other. So that can be a challenge. Inkjet does have a larger range of imaging than toner. So again, if you choose a media with a really large gamut, it's going to be harder to match each toner, so keep that in mind. And also, inkjet has a higher perceived resolution. So often, if you're trying to print a really fine tone in a gray or something, the inkjet's going to look more photographic, more continuous tone, and the toner's going to show you that screening a little bit. It's going to look a little bit rougher, and sometimes that can cause customers to reject a cross-media job because they don't feel it has the same imaging quality. So it's something to keep in mind. Of course, that's dependent on the level of toner technology that you're using as well. There are different levels of toner, whether it's a desktop model, a business class unit, or an imaging or a digital press unit. I wanted to let you know some promotions and resources. I did mention the Color Source blog earlier. That's a great resource for you to go to on our website. We have white papers and commentary up there that you can visit to gain some knowledge in these areas. We also have a promotion that we're running right now in line with our eColor Expert program. Basically, the eColor Expert program is an opportunity where if you buy a roll of our validation display graphic media for your inkjet device, you can call in and register with us, and we will assign you a personal eColor expert to basically help you with calibration, color management, and really getting you up and running and aligning your inkjet device to your toner device. So that's a great opportunity, and we invite you to participate in that if you so desire. I'm running a little late. I apologize for taking a little bit more time than we wanted to today. We do have one last poll for you, one last question before you leave. And also, if we do have any questions that have come up, this would be a great time. If you want, you can unmute your phone and go ahead and fire away with any questions that may have come up during the session. There's a poll. So we invite you to answer our poll question. And again, if there are any questions, now is the time. Well, we'll leave this poll open for as long as we want. Also, if you recall from earlier in the presentation, my email address was up there as well as the phone number. You can contact us through our website. As well, if you have any questions that come up after the session, I'd like to thank you for attending, and definitely stay tuned and look out for more webinars presented by Finite Color. Thank you to everyone, and enjoy your afternoon.